Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the News and Views podcast. A bit of a quiet one here today as it's just Tom and myself here, as the rest of the team is recovering from a very busy week at Money 2020. And I've got to say, this is the first time I've had a fan on this entire year. But Tom, how are you doing? It's hot weather where I am right now. How about yourself?
Yeah, it's good to be back. Had a little bit of a hiatus from the podcast, bit of traveling, which I'm going to be talking about a little bit today. But yeah, I'm enjoying the hot weather as well. Can finally get in the shorts and t-shirt and enjoy life a bit more.
The hammock is finally it's getting its use, shall I say. It's been sitting out there in the rain all year and now it's living the happy life. As you mentioned, you were going to be talking about your traveling. I mean, that's why you weren't here with us last week, right? It was just Polly and myself, but you were out in Morocco.
I was indeed, and that's what I'm going to be talking about a little bit more today. I got the pleasure of going to Marrakesh to go to GITEX Africa. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the event and also one of their main sort of talking points, which was creating a single digital market for the African continent.
Awesome stuff. Well, I mean, I think we'll go straight into that. But just to give our listeners a little preview of what I'm going to be talking about later, I'm going to be talking about some of the biggest cyber attacking threats that are taking place in Africa right now as well. So somewhat similar, perhaps. We'll see what topics you learn over at GITEX. But yeah, take it away, Tom.
So as I said, I got to go to Morocco and I visited the inaugural edition of GITEX Africa. And essentially that's a sort of showcase and celebration of a lot of African startups across sort of all technology sectors and verticals. And there were also a lot of big companies showcasing there too, like Dell, Orange, Intel as well. But essentially, while I was there, I was just trying to learn as much about the African sort of tech ecosystem as possible, find out about emerging tech trends. Obviously, Morocco's own tech ecosystem was a big point as well. And I wrote another article on that you can go check out. But one of the most prevalent points was African collaboration and basically building a single digital market for the entire continent. So essentially, long term, they have some very ambitious goals and they're trying to create a sort of single and secure digital market across Africa. They're trying to build regional links that eliminate roaming charges and improve cross-border trade across the entire continent by creating the largest sort of free trade area in the world, but digitally. So obviously they have a very unique landscape. I think that's one of the reasons why I find it so interesting because they're at such a different point in progress and they have such different challenges that they need to overcome compared to basically every other region in the world. So, for example, a lot of countries have some very remote villages that have either very limited or literally no connectivity. And in fact, I believe it's around a third of Africa. Only 1/3 of Africans even have broadband connectivity at the moment, or it might be just over that now. But it shows that more than half of the people sort of reside in Africa still don't have easy access to broadband. So that's where sort of this initiative comes in. And obviously, there's a lot of big companies like Orange and Smart Africa have initiatives to support connectivity, but the event was really trying to promote collaboration and they're trying to create conversation between the different African countries to support each other to ensure that they can achieve this goal. And one of the sort of objectives and aims is to try and create this single digital market by 2030. So it's obviously very soon, just over 6 years' time, they want to have at least created the base point for this landscape to exist. And that really, at the moment, is all about connectivity across the whole of Africa. And one of the sort of biggest points is talking about the age of its population. So a stat that I probably heard about 15 times on stage. Different people love this stat on stage at GITEX. But they said that around 60% of the entire population is under the age of 25. And that's so much younger than basically everywhere else in the world. The average age is so low compared to everywhere else. And it's all about trying to use that sort of advantage they have almost. And they were always talking about the importance of education, training people to fill talent gaps in the rapidly growing tech ecosystem. And one of the I think there's a CEO for Middle East and Africa in Orange, sort of spoke about the fact that investing in Africa doesn't just mean investing in tech, but also investing in training these young people to fill the talent gap. And they're sort of realizing the potential that everywhere in the world is experiencing this talent gap, but they actually have the people to fulfill it as long as they can get the training involved. And yeah, like we heard a lot about cybersecurity as well, which I believe you're going to go into. So I won't try and steal your thunder too much in that respect. But there's just a lot of interesting collaboration going on, and I found it really interesting to see. There's a real effort now to overcome the challenges that Africa has faced. But I just wanted to see what your thoughts are on their efforts and whether it's really possible for Africa to achieve their sort of 2030 objective for such a huge goal.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I wasn't there. You were really sort of, I guess, leading all coverage really of the event, and I've got to say that credit to you, Tom. The article was very very good. I mean, it covers all sorts of different points that you sort of highlighted there, and I mean, what I found really good as well was like some of the quotes that were there. I mean, as you mentioned, like that quote that was said over and over and over about sort of the low average age. I mean, maybe it's naivety from me, but generally speaking, the younger generations are more digitally inclined, right? And that sort of makes me think that especially with what I believe he's the governor of Lagos was saying. I'm not going to try and pronounce his name because I'll probably say it completely wrong, but he essentially just said that the mobile banking accounted for less than 2% of of banking essentially a few years ago, like over 15 years ago. But in 2017, this number reached 21%, and by 2021, over 20% of the population was engaging with digital banking. I mean, this kind of works hand in hand with the point that that they've said is, and it kind of works with what I said, right? The younger people are the more, generally speaking, digitally inclined that they are. And I think that is really sort of showing I guess the direction that the sort of development in Africa as a region is really going. It's not just country specific, but as a region, every single country is playing their part, right, in developing fintech and developing talent. And I mean, in a world where we are now, where there is this huge fintech talent shortage, it really is that much more important that I mean, it feels kind of bad to almost be mentioning it again, but it's just that important that you can't not mention financial education on the podcast, right? And I mean, sure, there's different aspects of financial education. There's the aspect of looking after your own finances, or there's the aspect of training yourself to be in the financial world, in the fintech world. And I think this is definitely a case of the latter. But training those people up to deal with the talent gap or the talent shortage that we're sort of seeing right now. I mean, it just goes to show sort of a promising region Africa really is. And I think this as an inaugural event to really showcase all of that and to really bring it to light, I think Tom, perhaps I'm going to give you some credit here and be like, perhaps it was your writing that's convinced me. But I really do think that, that the region that is promising. And I think that, it's definitely one to look out for.
No, absolutely, and I think you're right when you said the younger generation are more digitally inclined, and it's almost the fact that we've just had the pandemic, and that really accelerated the importance of connectivity worldwide. And I think that focus on connectivity and the broadband connection really exposed the sort of digital divide, especially between Africa and the rest of the world. Like I said, like only around a third of people in Africa have broadband connectivity. And I think the pandemic really accelerated the need that, you know, this is a problem that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. They can't continue waiting anymore. Um, and it's such an important point that they need to catch up essentially with the rest of the world if they're going to fulfill this potential that everyone's talking about. They have the youngest population, it's 60% under the age of 25. But if they don't have the initiatives in place to educate them and take advantage by implementing the very basic, at least, tech to create that connectivity, then they're not going to be able to address the problems. But if they can successfully do this, then the economic benefits that would go throughout the entirety of Africa could be absolutely huge. And I think if they're successful in achieving their aims, in 7-8 years time we could see a very different tech landscape because of what Africa is able to offer in terms of innovation. So yeah, I just thought it was a really important a really important event actually to sort of promote that connectivity and create an international event that hasn't really happened before in Africa.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we haven't really even discussed, which definitely deserves some discussion, is the idea of a single digital market for Africa. And I mean, having worked on in or around Latin America for such a long time, there's obviously a lot of parallels that are brought about between the African market and the Latin American market. And one of the biggest challenges that businesses from outside the region often find when trying to move into LATAM is the challenge of having so many different currencies, right? I mean, each country basically has its own currency, and it's not like Europe where you expand into Europe and it's just one singular digital currency. So because of that, there's that challenge, right? And I think, if you're starting to talk about a single digital market, I guess there's two sort of real avenues of looking at it, because I mean, obviously Latin America still is booming, right? And it has sort of done tremendously well, but there's still a long way for it to go. But I think in the sort of from the stats at least that I can see from the article, it really does seem that most of the country is still building almost from the ground up right now. And if that is the case, I don't see a reason why we can't or they can't necessarily just, because there is this community feel, right? There is a collaboration feel from it. It's not sort of like an every country for itself situation that appears to be happening, right? And if every country is chipping in to help develop this, digital market, this digital world, to accelerate the African continent as a whole and the countries within it, I think that's when you're really going to start to see sort of like the benefits. And then I think that is sort of, it does lead to a possible creation of a singular digital market, in my opinion, because everyone's evolving at the same time. It's not like, for example, Brazil in Latin America, which is sort of, or has historically been a bit ahead of the other countries around it, if you know what I mean. What do you think? Do you agree, or?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think in terms of the sort of recent growth of Africa in the last sort of decade, especially, you've seen so much growth in terms of mobile money, and you've seen M-Pesa has become the most sort of successful mobile money service in the region, and fintechs, especially themselves, are creating solutions to areas, especially in Africa, that they haven't really been able to approach before. And you spoke about different currencies. There are so many different currencies in Africa, and they're all at sort of different levels of stability and reliability. But fintechs are offering sort of one step at a time the ability for sort of cross trade and to send different currencies across borders, transfer this money more easily, exchange the money more easily. And it just means that, fintechs are really able to create a more digital environment. And that's exactly what is going to provide a really positive sort of platform for this sort of future growth throughout the entire continent. So, yeah, I think you're right in terms of the parallels, um, and especially the sort of mobile money aspect is creating a really exciting landscape. So it'll be interesting to see how it sort of progresses in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I think moving on to the next article that we wanted to discuss today from Kaspersky, and I think it does work sort of, as you mentioned, very nicely with the article that you brought to the table today, because we're still staying within the sort of the African region, I suppose. And it, as I mentioned, it's from the cybersecurity experts, and it's their latest findings on cyber attacks in the Middle East and Africa. So, having released data from the Kaspersky Security Network, or the KSN, the cybersecurity experts found that of the top 50 countries most affected by cyber attacks, many were from Africa. The article that we're looking at today looks at Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa in more depth specifically. So I don't want to dive into too many numbers right away, but the report sort of explains what types of attacks were most prevalent in these countries, and sort of why they're being targeted. And notably, it found that backdoor and spyware attacks were the most common threats in South Africa, with a joint 106,000 attack attempts. And it's not to say they weren't prevalent in Nigeria and Kenya too, because they amassed 46,000 and 143,000 respectively. However, the cybersecurity firm warned that despite these high figures in Kenya, organizations should be wary of exploit attacks as well, as they amounted to 177,000 incidents blocked in Kenya. However, one of the most interesting aspects that I found from this article, which is something that I have never heard of before, hence wanting to bring it to the table today, was this development of something called a zombie machine. And Kaspersky highlighted that the emergence of zombie machines, especially in South Africa, were very, very prevalent, and that in fact there were 1.6 million zombie machines detected in the country, with a further 300,000 in Kenya. So what this is a machine that is connected to a device that becomes a part of a botnet. So some examples of technologies that can fall victim to this include legacy or old forgotten devices, IoT devices, network equipment, printers, cameras, and possibly even most bizarrely, coffee machines. So, I wanted to really bring this to the table today to highlight, we always talk about, how fraudsters are developing technologies to try and stay ahead of tech firms that are doing everything they can to essentially put a stop to it, right? It's a cat and mouse chase almost, and who's the cat and who's the mouse is really up for debate. But I think, you know, the report goes into further detail on how to deal with a target on your back, and we hear from some of the cybersecurity experts. But I think, like I mentioned, the main thing that I wanted to talk about was the development of these technologies, and I suppose really, if it's surprising to you the types of attacks that we're seeing, like backdoor and spyware and exploits, and really what you sort of thought about these zombie machines and the impact that they could have, sort of worldwide, right? Because like I mentioned, I hadn't heard of these up until I saw this article. So yeah, no, I wanted to get your thoughts on and bring in any insights that you found from the event as well.
Yeah, so as you said, it links really nicely into what I was finding out about, particularly sort of in the African landscape. And one of the reasons I sort of held back on the cybersecurity aspect of what I learned was because of your article. But I think, especially with these sort of aims to increase connectivity, everyone was stressing at the event the importance of fighting against cybersecurity, and a lot of effort is going into, well, not fighting against cybersecurity, sorry, but
There you
fighting
go.
against
I was
cyber
waiting to
attacks.
see if you would pick up
Uh,
on that.
yeah, I saw the eyebrow raise and I got a bit nervous. Um, but essentially, they're trying to increase cybersecurity with the sort of tech platforms to fight against these attacks. But the most important thing is actually education. By educating the population, that maybe haven't been connected as well in the past, when they have these devices, it could be something as simple as, a coffee machine. People are becoming more connected in a number of different ways, not just, getting broadband connectivity and laptops and on their phones and things, but it's creating a really strong educational sort of approach to ensure that everyone knows the dangers, how to, I don't know how to phrase it, like really reduce the sort of impacts that these attacks can have by being aware of what can attack them, and how to best behave in regard to connectivity to ensure sort of cyber awareness. And one of the quotes that I thought was quite important was from, I'm probably butchering his name, but Michel Aroji. So he was the digital development practice lead in Africa and the sort of Middle East for the World Bank. And he said, we need to ensure that there is a strong cyber awareness, because cybersecurity is something that is a responsibility of each of us. And it's all well and good saying, we can invest X amount of millions or billions into cybersecurity. But if the education isn't there, then we're going to fall victim to attacks in any number of ways, regardless. So, yeah, I just thought it was an interesting one to sort of tie into what I learned at the event as well. And it's interesting to see how in different landscapes there are always different types of attacks that are the most prevalent. So yeah, as you said, I hadn't learned about these sort of zombie machines until you brought it up, really. So it's interesting, but also a bit scary to see that there seems to be a never-ending number of ways for fraudsters to gain access to our sort of data.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess if there's a silver lining, cybersecurity companies are always going to be in business. I guess if we're looking on the bright side of things, but I mean, on a more serious note, I should say, this idea of like education. I mean, I guess it's almost like I guess of those two that I mentioned earlier, it kind of is still of that latter point, and I think one of the that point came up in the article as well. And I mean, technology is only as effective as the person controlling it. And I think that's something that a lot of people forget, with the developments of automation, with the developments that we're seeing, across the industry. It's often easy to forget that, technology is only good as the person that's, put in the data for the technology to use, right? Excuse me. And I think, another important investment that's highlighted in the article is that organizations must make sure they're training their employees, and it's not like just a one-off training. Take this course and you're done. No, it's a continuous thing, because as you mentioned, there's always going to be fraudsters trying to get one step ahead. Like I said, it's this cat and mouse chase, right? And it's fraudsters are trying to stay ahead, trying to make sure they can continue to cheat the system. And the only way that employees are going to be able to have the ability to avoid this is, if they're given the training, they know what to look out for. If they don't know what to look out for, then what's even the point? So I think that is one of the most important things, is that it's not just a one-off. It's a real-time access to intelligence on the latest attack methods and continuous training to be constantly aware of what's happening. And like, we might not be aware of these zombie machines, but so long as the people that are trying to provide us with the equipment to protect us are able to sort of find ways to continue to negate the impact that these things are happening, then I think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's such a important time to have this discussion, not just on the podcast, but through Africa right now, because as things become more digital, they can't really afford any let up in any regard when it comes to cybersecurity. So, we're mentioning the importance of education and continued education over time, but also as connectivity increases, and if there's going to be a real possibility for a single digital market across the continent, the cybersecurity has to become first and foremost, and it has to be one of the most, or one of the priorities, should I say, because otherwise, the whole thing could come tumbling down. If there's not enough cybersecurity, then it literally cannot succeed. But yeah, so it's an interesting time, and it's only going to be the future that lets us know how they're going to be able to deal with the future of cyber attacks. And obviously, they're going to continue to increase. Frankly, there isn't any way to avoid that, as connectivity and as they get access to a greater number of devices. There's going to be just a continuing increase of attacks, and it's all about how they're going to deal with that through investment and education, to ensure that they can really fight against it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think when you're looking at it from like a grander scheme of things, right? Like we talk about the single digital market. If that's breached, it's not just it's not like just the U.S. financial crisis, right, of 2008, where everything sort of hits the fan. It's a continent. There's is it 52, 54 countries all being affected? Like, it could be really disastrous. So yeah, in that aspect, it definitely is it's a top priority. I don't think there's any way around it. It simply is the top priority. But yeah, no, I'm there was some great talking points today. And for any more information on anything we discussed, or for more news on the latest things happening in the fintech world, do check out our website, www.thefintechtimes.com. And yeah, but now on to our final section of the podcast, what I learned this week. So, being fintech journalists, we're in prime positions to see the latest developments in the fintech world. So we thought we'd take this opportunity to share with you, our listeners, something that we've learned this week. So Tom, what have you learned this week?
So, as you know, every week I delve a little bit into the sort of latest UK fintech news in a UK fintech roundup that comes out every Wednesday. If you want to take a look, but essentially, one of the most important things I learned this week when I was researching that was that Starling Bank has actually launched a UK first feature that's hoping to help survivors of economic abuse. And this new feature is called Hide References. And it's essentially launched in collaboration with the charity Surviving Economic Abuse. And the feature enables people to hide abusive payment references in the app without having to block a payment entirely. So essentially, what's happening in the past is domestic and economic abuse survivors are receiving threatening messages within their payment references. And these can accompany literally payments as small as like 1 penny, or alongside money they're rightfully owed, so like child support. And this feature basically allows them to claim the money without having to receive or read any intimidating messages. So I thought that was just a very nice development to support sort of abuse victims in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to sort of make a small joke at the start there and be like, oh, shameless plug for the UK Roundup. But that's, I think you've sort of highlighted something really important. So I don't really want to say that anymore. And yeah, no, I think it's a really, really good service that, Starling have introduced. And I think hopefully we'll see this replicated across other financial organizations because, yeah, it's really, really good. What I wanted to discuss this week was the impact that, credit awareness, or I should say the lack of credit awareness, there is in the UK and how people aren't aware of what is affecting their credit score and, in fact, what their credit score even is. So, in an article I was working on from Go Car Credit highlighting the lack of awareness among consumers about their credit profile, it highlighted a report from YouGov, the market research and data analytics firm, which found that 69% of UK adults don't know their credit score. And considering, I've recently started to pay close attention to my credit score and I'm sort of how to find new ways to improve it, I found that a really shocking fact, really, that not more people are aware. And I mean, the article goes into more details on how to improve it and how to sort of improve it even from a bad situation. So I would definitely recommend it for everyone to check out, really, whether you've got a good credit score, are looking to improve it, or it's not in a very good position. I would definitely recommend checking out this article as it's a big help to bettering your credit score. But yeah, no, Tom, thank you ever so much for joining me on the podcast this week. It's been a very, very fun insight into Africa and, the benefits that fintech is having elsewhere around the world. And yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on again. It's nice to get back into the thick of things.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using #TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.